funny how our perceptions of a film or a piece of art can be varied and altered even after you've seen that piece of art multiple times. When we last left Final Frontier Reviews and I was talking about First Contact and doing my little lead-in to try to, set up this review, I spoke of Insurrection with a little bit of reservation and this sense of not really looking forward to it, like it wasn't that great of a film. And to be honest, when I was recording it, that's exactly how I felt. And I went home and I stuck it in and I watched it, and I'm watching it and I am completely 100% engaged in the movie, no pun intended. And I was taken in by the story. I thought, I liked the characters. I liked just about everything they did, and I was thinking, wow, I like this movie. And yet, when I think about it, I don't think about it with positivity. And that's been true. That's been the legacy of this film. This film is very, I don't want to say despised, but a lot of people just do not like this movie. And what's even weirder is that my response to it yesterday is not new. This is how I've responded to the film for years. When I don't watch it or I think about watching it, I'm like, oh, that one, oh man. And then I watch it, I'm like, this is pretty good. And again, this isn't like a forgotten gem, something I haven't watched in, years. I've watched this movie fairly regularly. So it's just bizarre that I have this one outlook on it when I'm thinking about it and another outlook on it when I'm actually watching it. And I don't think this is unique to me. I think a lot of people have that issue with this movie. So the question we have to answer as we go into a dive on this film is, if this movie does so many things right, and we'll talk about a lot of the things it does right here in a minute, if it does all of these things well and right and the movie is entertaining, why then is it not looked on and remembered with more fondness? Why is it set up always as a scapegoat? And I think that's the real question we have to answer when we examine Star Trek Insurrection. So let's do that. Let's dive. So before we get into the analysis, what is this film about? Well, again, I'll try to sum it up as best I can. So somewhere in space, amidst all these nebulae and space magic, there's a little planet which is home to a small population of people, 600 people. They always make sure to drive that point home. 600 people, called the Baku. And the Baku live an idyllic, G-rated wonderland of a life. They skip through the meadows. They paint, they're artisans, they're just so in love with nature and beauty, and everything is just so wonderful and perfect and beauteous and spontaneous. What the mystery of this planet is that the combination of the weird nebula and the rings around the planet creates a specific type of radiation that keeps the Baku's cells in a constant state of regeneration. So what that basically means is that this planet is the fountain of youth. You go there and your wounds are healed, your body reverts to a younger form, you're healthy, you're happy, and you feel the best that you've ever felt in your life forever and ever and ever and ever. Sounds pretty sweet, right? Well, into this idyllic little land comes a race called the Sona, which are in league with the Federation to forcibly relocate the Baku to another planet so they can use an evil space machine to suck up the radiation in the rings and use this now for medical research and whatnot. It would leave the planet completely uninhabitable, and these people would be forced to leave their homes. Enter into this now comes Captain Picard and the crew of the Enterprise E, and they take great exception to this with the argument that it is against everything the Federation stands for, yada, 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 and they stage an insurrection. They go against orders to try to keep the Baku on the planet and thwart the plans of the Sona. So that's the nuts and bolts. That's the basic plot. So we'll talk about my theories on why I feel this film is not looked upon as favorably as I think it should be. We'll look at those later. I think there are two main reasons, but we'll save those for the end. Let's talk about the film itself in a removed kind of point of view. All in all, I think this is a very good film. First of all, I think the idea of it, the central idea, is very good. Having Picard, who has always been Mr. Yay Federation, say, no, the Federation is wrong and what we are doing is wrong, and actually stand up for that, that is a great idea for a film. So the story is strong. In terms, you can't help but view this film in comparison to First Contact. The story is much lighter. It's not a life or death kind of, it's a much more kind of easygoing romp. It has more humor in it than First Contact did. Sometimes to its detriment. Sometimes I think some of the jokes that they put in there are real groaners. Whoever thought it was funny to have Data do the whole, in case of a water landing, I have been designed as a flotation device joke. That person can get kicked square in the nuts, for all I care. But just for that, I don't care if he wrote everything else and he's the most brilliant person in the world. If he wrote that line, here's a kick in the nuts for you. But anyway, but the humor is still a lot of fun. They have fun with the premise of a place where, you know, wounds are healed. Geordi has the emotional moment of having his eyes for the first time in his life. And then you get the opposite side of it with Worf, who they always leave in these movies, I think, just to be the cosmic punching bag. You know, he goes through Klingon puberty. He gets a big old Klingon wart on his nose. His hair grows longer. He gets, you know, I think they leave him in there just so they can make fun of him. There's a great little scene with Troy and Crusher where, like, have you noticed how much perkier your boobs are now? That's not something you thought you'd ever hear them talk about in Star Trek. So I remember when my best friend Matt and I saw that in the theater, we were like, what? They're talking about their boobs! So only nerds talked about their boobs up till that point. But anyway. Anywho. So it's much lighter. Jonathan Frakes returns to the director's chair for this one, and I think that was a really smart call. I didn't get a chance to go into this in as much detail as I wanted to when I was talking about First Contact, but let's take that little detour now. Jonathan Frakes is just a really talented director, and he's one of those directors that as you look at his IMDb page, you wonder why he hasn't kind of broken out a little bit more. Why is he not more in demand? He's a very prolific television director. He's got credits on a lot of shows, sci-fi shows. He's directed for every Star Trek show there is. You know, he's done the Orville, he did The Gifted. But his motion picture credits are fairly limited. I believe it's these two films and then two kind of Nickelodeon kiddie films. And if you're happy doing that, I'm not here to say, well, you should do it. If that's what you're happy and you're making money and you're living a good life, good on you. But I don't know. I think he has a much more skilled directorial eye that I'd love to see him take on some more motion pictures and see what he can bring to it. And again, you can see that in the style that he brings to this film versus the style he brought to First Contact. The visual language of this film is completely different. You know, for instance, First Contact, because it was dealing with the Borg, was a much heavier story, much scarier story. It's very industrial in its look. A lot of sharp, unnatural angles, you know, artificial shapes and whatnot. Geometrically perfect things. The film looks a little darker and a little grittier. This movie, by contrast, is all very bright. It's very open. We spend most of our time down on the planet, which is very green. I don't know where they shot it, but wherever they shot it, it was beautiful. The Baku themselves, their clothing is, you know, creates a lot of soft lines. Their architecture is very rounded, so natural shapes. It's just a completely different visual language between two films, and yet they both feel like they exist in the same world, which is really important for a Star Trek film. I can't say that the Sona are the most interesting of enemies. They're clearly evil. You know, that's the thing with Star Trek movies. You can always tell who the clearly evil people are. The TV shows, they're a little bit more ambiguous, but the movies is like, no, that's the fucking bad guy. They're not the most interesting villains, but even their shapes, the shape of their ships, their layout is all very rounded. The Sona do have kind of an interesting look in that they're the gimmick is that there are these guys who are suffering from some kind of disease. They never go into it exactly what's wrong with them, but they've got their bodies producing a lot of toxins. Their skin has to be taken and pulled back and like stapled to their heads to stretch it so it doesn't wrinkle and all that. I honestly believe that if Jonathan Frakes was given full range, he could do whatever he wanted, I think he would be an incredible horror movie director. He seems to have a knack for that and an interest in it. Some of the scenes in First Contact, while not, you know, intense by modern day standards, for Star Trek they were pretty gruesome. And this one kind of follows suit without some of the Sona stretching techniques. You know, their reliance on, I guess, maybe it's taking a swat at low-hanging fruit. You know, but they're not that interesting. But F. Murray Abraham as the Wafu, the leader, you know, the head bad guy, he is pretty good. He's very magnetic, has a very strong film presence. I think the differences in the story between this one and First Contact are also very good. The stories are always going to focus on Picard because he's our lead. So in the last one, we had a revenge story, an Ahab story, and Picard went to a very dark place. Here, we're taking him to a much softer, happier place. He has a love interest. He falls in love with one of the Baku named Don, you know, not named, but played by Donna Murphy. And boy, let me tell you, talk about a couple that you wouldn't mind just listening to them talk. Because Donna Murphy has a very nice, soft, breathy voice. Patrick Stewart has his Patrick Stewart voice. So the scenes where they're just talking to each other, it's like, man, you really do feel at ease. You're like, ah, you know, it's like summer breeze coming into your ears. So yeah, the differences in the story are I think the story is fairly well balanced in terms of how it breaks up the 7-person crew and gives them something to do. I think Dr. Crusher and Geordi still kind of end up with the short end of the stick. They don't get as much to do. Of course, Data is kind of at the forefront as the second lead, but it's not that bad. It's not as, you know, bad as it is in some of the other films that they do. I will say, as a Star Trek fan, I know other Star Trek fans will hate me for saying this. I gotta say though, I think Data was a great character. I think he was fun to write. Brent Spiner is a magnificent actor. But I gotta tell you, folks, I got so tired of listening to Data's whining. Dear God, I got so tired of, oh, I'll never be human, I'll never have emotions, I shall never know what. And what's worse is I got tired of that, and everybody's like, oh, Data, you're so perfect. Oh, Data, oh, we just love you. You're so flawless and awesome. You know, That was one of the things I kind of got really tired of with Picard, is they did that a lot. The whole thing was about how great Data was. So even though his stuff in this film are not that bad, his little thing, he's got a relationship with one of the kids on the planet, and he's doing that. Well, I will never know what it is like to be a child. Shut the fuck up. Just so tired of listening to your shit. At some point, it's great that you want to evolve and you want to become more than what you are. That's phenomenal. Good on you. Self-improvement, always a good thing. But at some point, you need to stop and be proud of what you actually are. And nobody ever made that point to him. So that's me going off on a tangent. It's funny to think that when I started ranting about that, I was actually giving the film some praise, going, at least it's not so Data focused. I think there's a really fun, the action scenes, because again, it's a movie and they're trying, this is late 90s, so action movies were very much the thing. So of course it's pushing the action element of it. I think the action scenes were different than First Contact, differently staged, still exciting in their own way. There's a great kind of dogfight with Picard and Worf in one shuttlecraft and Data in another, when he's kind of flipped his shit, and they beat him by singing Gilbert and Sullivan. It's a really funny bit and a really character driven bit, which I think is why it works. There are some things in this film that I can't say that I do like. The little kid in it gets fucking annoying, as most little kids in movies do. He's not a bad actor, it's just the character is irritating. And again, you have this little kid in there so he can run off and get caught in a cave-in at one point to cause more tension. So you have a kid in there who's acting really, really fucking stupid, which is even more annoying. They do this weird thing, the whole thing that Donna Murphy is constantly telling Patrick Stewart is that here on this planet, things slow down, we move at a slower pace, we're not in such a hurry, we're happy here. And she seems to have some kind of ability to slow down time, which isn't really explained, or if it's a metaphor for something, I'm not entirely sure what it is. I also like that this film does what Star Trek has always prided itself on doing, and that is reflecting the important issues of the day. Forced relocations, they're still going on, unfortunately, but in the 90s there was a lot of that going on. There was a lot of it. And bringing that up and putting it in this, as they said when they were doing Star Trek 6, you can take these things out of the real life context where people seem to have more of a personal stake in them, and put them out there in Klingon land, where you can kind of examine them from an audience perspective and go, wow, yeah, you're right, this is really wrong. So I think that was a smart move. And I think they play it up fairly well. All in all, I think this is a really strong film. And like I said, I watched it completely engaged in it. Just sucked into it and enjoying it. So this brings us back to the question that I asked at the very beginning. If this film is so good, I think it's good. I don't think it's perfect. It's not First Contact. It's not Wrath of Khan. It's not Voyage Home. It's not Undiscovered Country. But it's pretty solid. So if this film is decent, why then is it not thought of as fondly as some other entries into the franchise? What's the problem? And I believe that problem is twofold. I think there are two things going on here that work against this film. And oddly enough, there are things that I mentioned in the First Contact review and said that these were some of this film's strengths. I've mentioned that I think the story is good. The idea of it is good. It is a next generation story. It really is. It's a good idea. But the problem is, and especially when you compare it to what just happened with First Contact, it doesn't feel at any time like it's an idea big enough or important enough for a full film. This this idea, this story would fit perfectly into the show. This would be a great series, season finale, season premiere, cliffhanger thing. You know, Picard leaves Starfleet to fight for some lost cause, and then, you know, you come back next season to see how it all works out. But it's not really, if you're going to go with some idea like Picard is going to rebel against Starfleet, you need to push that envelope. Because that's what they sold the movie on. That's what the name of the film is Insurrection. But they're really not rebelling against Starfleet. There's really only one guy, one admiral from Starfleet representing evil Starfleet. And the rest of the time they're fighting the Sona. So they're not really, you know, on the run from Starfleet. They're still doing it in the safest, kind of most muted way possible. So yeah, I don't think it was a big enough idea. So I think that's part one. I think people wanted, you enjoy the movie, but you leave it and you go, well, that was good, but it was kind of nothing real special. So that's one problem. Here's the second, and this is one that I really firmly believe is a big issue with it, because it's the issue I always have with it, and I know a lot of other Trek fans have this problem. One of the things I mentioned, again with the First Contact review, is that one of the problems, or one of the considerations that the Next Generation movies had to kind of take into account, is that they did not exist in a vacuum. All of the previous Star Trek films, with the original cast, again, for most of their existence, they were the only Star Trek that was out there. And even when they weren't, the other Star Trek that wasn't out there, first of all, was just one. And that one took place 80 years further in the future. So it really didn't matter what you did or what you handled, because it wasn't going to have that much of an effect on the other show that was supposedly sharing your timeline and your universe. That's not the case with the Next Generation films. The Next Generation films not only did not exist in a vacuum, they had a whole expanded universe going on. While this movie is out in theaters, there are 2 other shows happening that share the same timeline, that share the same continuity. Now in First Contact, they were able to deal with that very well. Here's the Defiant, here's Worf, yay, Deep Space Nine. Here's the holographic Doctor, here's a cameo by Ethan Phillips, yay, Voyager. There you go, acknowledged, done. But this movie and the people who made it didn't really take into consideration what was going on in the greater Star Trek universe at the time. Or if they did, they chose to ignore it. So for those who don't know, this movie came out 98, I believe it said. At this point in time in Star Trek history, the Federation is locked into a bitter war with the Dominion and Cardassia. A war that the Federation is losing at this point. That's what's going on Deep Space Nine. And for Trekkies like me, that was a great thing. We had never seen a war played out in Star Trek. They talked about them. They'd had wars that happened before the shows began, but we'd never seen a full-out war and the effects and the stories that come out of that. So the Dominion War was a great, great creative idea from the creators of Deep Space Nine. But as a Trek fan, even though you're engrossed in the story and you love Deep Space Nine, there's always this thought in the back of your head. What's the Enterprise doing during all of this? You've got this huge war that we're losing against a seemingly unbeatable enemy. What's the Enterprise up to? You know, the flagship of the Federation. One of the most powerful ships that's always on the front line of everything. Where is the Enterprise? What's it doing? And you go and see this movie and your answer is they're opening diplomatic relationships with the fish people of Nylar 4 and trying to save the picture-perfect Baku from the big nasty Sona. And that is a big letdown to Now, let me specify that I understand why they made the decision not to include the Dominion War in a Next Generation movie. They mention it. They mention the Dominion, so they're aware that the Dominion is out there and, being bastards. But they don't, they don't address it. I understand why they don't want to do that for all the reasons you could list. One reason I heard was that, they had just done a big war movie. They'd just done a big action-centered film, that dealt with ugliness and the dark side of humanity with First Contact. And they wanted to go back and revisit the beauty of humanity. Okay, fair enough. I get that. It makes sense. I also understand, and again, as a fan of the show, that Deep Space Nine was always in the shadow of the Next Generation. And for the people who really didn't like Deep Space Nine, it's too dark, it's too this, it's too that, the real complaint was it's not the Next Generation. So it would be a real kick in the pants for the Deep Space Nine producers and crew and characters. They're fighting this unwinnable war, you're doing this unwinnable war, but here comes the Enterprise, we'll save you, pew pew pew, we win! It would really be, a slap in the face. It's the same reason, I remember when they killed Kirk in Generations, and a lot of people were like, well, why can't they just leave Kirk alive? It's like, because if Kirk is alive in the same timeline as the Next Generation, you run into the same problem. So every movie it's going to be, well, here comes Captain Kirk to save the day, and they're never going to get out from under the shadow of the original. So I get every reason why they didn't want to do this. But I also think that in the end, none of those reasons make a difference. People wanted to see what the Enterprise was doing while Starfleet was losing this massive war, and to get this very mellow, laid back, trying to save Disneyland kind of thing. It was very kind of like, seriously? And what gets me is that with just a few minor adjustments to the story, you could have had almost the exact same story, but it would have still fit into the timeline of the Dominion War and made sense. So what if at the beginning of the film, instead of, Picard and the crew playing diplomats to the fish people of whatever, they're on their way back from some big campaign against the Dominion. They're beaten up, they're broken, they've seen a lot of death and dying, their morale is down. They could have been in the same fleet with the Defiant, so that explains why Worf is there as opposed to, hi, I'm here now. And then they get the news they got to go to this planet to save Data and whatnot. And now you have this wonderful contrast between the ugliness of war and the temptation to stay in this really peaceful, beautiful planet. So that would have helped. Now let's up the stakes again. For anybody who saw that god-awful Avatar movie from James Cameron, if you remember, the reason the evil military was going to destroy the peaceful blue Ewoks was because they were trying to find a mineral called unobtainium, which only serves to paint them as the clear antagonists and the bad guys. But I've always wondered what would happen if instead of looking for some mineral, the magic glowy 3D planet of Avatar was actually home to some chemical or plant life or something that could create a cure for some disease that's ravaging Earth. So now your antagonists have a sympathetic motive for why they're doing what they're doing. So take this example and put it into Insurrection. The Admiral from Starfleet, who represents, the big bad Starfleet, is just one guy, and he seems very lazy about the whole thing. He's like, we want to save people. We want to benefit the Federation. change that a little bit and make him the like the admiral in charge of this fleet who's seen all these people die. They're not being able to get them to medical ships in time, but if they get this, this radiation shit from this planet, they could heal people up and save their lives. Now you have a drive and a sympathetic reason why he is doing what he's doing. And you also paint a more interesting picture morally with the whole question of, if you're doing a terrible thing, but you have proper motives, do the ends justify the means? We never get a sense of that with this guy. It's just like, well, we just kind of want to. It's like they went through every possible step and decided, let's go with the evil plan, guys. We're the Federation. We're always so good. Can we be evil this week? Please? But making just those tiny adjustments, I feel, would have upped the stakes for this movie, made it feel more like a story worthy of a feature film. Really have Picard and them go on the run from Starfleet, not just the Sona, but have Starfleet be chasing them down. Really up it. And I think you could have still done the beautiful story, the engaging characters. It could still be lighter. And I think you could still connect it to the Dominion War. Either that, or I think what they should have done is done a Dominion War movie after First Contact and then done this one, and I think it would have been received a lot better, personally. Ironically, on that, and I don't think this was something they meant or something they planned, but it could have been, when you talk about the effects on the greater universe and things going forward, this is kind of one of the first steps into Starfleet kind of becoming a bunch of bastards. For all of Star Trek's run, Starfleet has been good and noble, and the bad admirals or officers here or there were the exception and not the rule. But this admiral and his wicked plan are, and again, with no real motivation outside of, hey, that'd be good for medicine, which I don't know what more medicine you need in the fucking 24th century. It's all solved by magic wands that light up and go, cancer be gone! But characters like this with this kind of evil plan of we're going to do this for the good of the Federation probably gave way to things like Section 31 from Deep Space Nine, the kind of more jaded, militaristic Federation that we see now in Picard, and that type of thing. So you're talking longer scope, and I think that's good. I think you need to reflect back on that. So I think this movie has had some things like get out of its hands, and it's mostly fan reaction. It's not a bad film. I think it's much stronger than I ever remember it being, but it's nothing. My friend Matt said it best. It's a good story, but it's nothing groundbreaking. And I think that's kind of the legacy it lives with. We've journeyed with the Next Generation crew up to this point for so many years. We come to know and love them. And we've gone through this wonderful journey through the Star Trek cinematic universe. I've had a great time looking back at them. But as Q once said, all good things must come to an end. And for every next generation, that generation must inevitably hand things over to the generation after it and must step down. And what we will view next time will be, up until now, unless something changes, the final film in the original Star Trek series, the original Star Trek timeline, and the final voyage of the Next Generation as they face their greatest nemesis. So join me next time for Star Trek Nemesis. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies, and make it so.